Brian from Experior Golf is a mountain warrior here.
The obsessive DP.
All right, guys, welcome back to the Obsessive DP. Today we are outdoors. This is different for us. We're at Sand Canyon Country Club, and we're gonna do a shootout between these two cameras. Kevin's side is the RED Komodo, which is an $11,000 setup. Brian's side is the A7iii, which is...
with this lens, this is a G Master lens.
It's an expensive lens.
Yeah, so 5 grand?
5 grand versus 11 grand. They're golfing today. We're shooting with both cameras side by side, and you'll be able to see which one is better. So let's check out the footage.
4 grand, actually. The 2 grand for
4 grand.
Yeah.
For the next few minutes, we'll be cycling through shots from each camera. I've labeled each camera on screen with an X or a Y. Let's see if you can guess which is the Komodo and which is the A7iii. Give it your best shot. You'll probably want to go full screen and hit 4K on this video so that you can get the full effect. Or you may not see the difference between the two because YouTube kind of compresses the crap out of these cameras. Both cameras were set to standard settings, 5600K, zero tint, and a basic Rec 709 LUT to finish off the look. We will reveal which camera is which later on in the video. Also stay tuned for after we do the camera reveal here, because we will be doing a side-by-side framing comparison. And this will show what Matt, the Experior Golf camera guy, usually captures versus the angle that we captured. You can see the difference side by side. He filmed this episode as he usually does with the A7iii, while I filmed the same scenes with slightly different framing with the Komodo. I thought later on that it would be informative to kind of talk about each shot side by side and see why I chose the framing I did. All right, so that's enough rambling. You've seen the footage. What do you think? It's time to reveal which camera is which. X. The letter X was the Komodo, the letter Y was the A7iii. If you've used the A7iii for a while, you could probably recognize the look. The biggest difference between the two is the dynamic range. The highlights start overexposing way earlier than the Komodo. You can push the exposure way harder, you can bring the blacks down without crushing, you can really push the footage in different directions and it still holds up. Versus the A7iii, if you start really applying an aggressive look, it's not gonna pull through and it's probably gonna just crumble at your fingertips. It's just a harder camera to work with in post, but the data rate is great for storage and for quickly turning videos around, which is what YouTube is all about. Cool, so let's cycle through a few scenes where we had both cameras side by side and analyze the framing. Starting with this one here. So here's the A7iii and here's the Komodo. Immediately is wider, which is not really YouTube. YouTube, you kind of want to get close and personal with your YouTubers. As the audience, you really feel that connection. You see the tops of the mountains on the Komodo footage. You know, sticking to the A7iii footage, you don't see the top of this mountain. It's cut off, which in my mind is just a little less cinematic. Now, what we could have done with the A7iii is gone lower, could have brought it down. That would have brought the mountain more in frame. If we had a lower angle in the A7iii, the mountain would have actually come down too. Maybe hit a similar frame just like this one, but that's the difference there. Here's an interesting one where we played with foreground elements with the Komodo. So what I love when I'm using long lenses is to put something in the foreground, something in the midground, something in the background. So that's what we did here. We have our character, obviously, on the left third. We have our hole straight in the center because that's where our eye wants to go. That's what we're focused on. We're focused on golf, which is hit the ball in the hole. So we're focused on the hole. And then here is this little out of focus action. It was actually the back of one of their golf bags. So there's some clubs sticking out. It's just a nice frame. It levels out this nice frame, makes it have 3 different elements. Even the far background too, with deep background, we got mountains. There's 4 different elements that we're filling the frame with and just making it dynamic and interesting looking. So you're gonna see on Matt's footage, he's the Experior golf cameraman, you're gonna see him focus way more on story. So he's gonna be focused on who's talking, or he's gonna be focused on where the ball is going, versus when I was out there, I had more cinematic framing in mind. I did a lot more wides. I didn't necessarily follow the ball every time they hit the ball. Make sure the mountains are in the shot, make sure we have the sky in the shot, make sure our characters are living on one of the thirds, left or right, sometimes centered, and I just had a different focus in my mind. A lot of times I was like laying on the ground or kneeling, because when I did that, it was bringing the mountains down in view and just making it a little more of a prettier shot. So you can see the difference here is just framing up, getting everything symmetrical. So on the A7 III footage, he's not really on a third. It's kind of like, I think the center of the frame's here, so his head's kind of in the center, but he's not really, nothing's really living in the exact center of frame. I mean, I wouldn't put his head in the frame, in the exact center. I would put maybe him or the ball in the exact center of the frame. And it's a little off, it's a little to the right. Versus the Komodo footage here, everything's super centered. We have our character dead center in frame instead of his head dead center, and we're looking straight down range, versus we were a little sideways. You can tell by the golf pegs, I forget what these are called, the tee off thingies. Cinematography has a lot of symmetry involved in it. As you can see, I'm lying on the ground here to make sure that this mountain range is not to the top of my frame, but it's kind of like the top third of the frame versus out of frame or just kissing the top of the frame. We want it to be still in frame nicely. I really love how the mountain range here is kind of shoulder height, and then his head's just sticking on top of it. Like he's higher than the mountains. That's what we're trying to say here. He has overcome the mountains. This Brian from Experior Golf is a mountain warrior here. Contrast that with Matt's angle, where he's just standing like he normally does, and Brian is lower than the mountains here. He doesn't have that prestige, that power that this framing gave him. Totally different feel. It's just a stupid shot of golf carts, but I really like it. I really love how they're positioned, where we kind of have this golf cart on the left third and he's kind of facing this way, whereas the other one's kind of behind facing another way. I think it just looks cool. Nothing super fancy about it. It's just kind of a cool frame. So here's a big difference here, where Matt chose an angle that probably made more sense for the narrative of the story and actually capturing the moment so that the audience can be engaged, versus I chose a much wider angle, much further back. I did have a better shot of his face, I would say. I guess he did too, but the hat kind of covered it. But he follows the ball here, where I just kind of sit there and just take in the nature of the shot. We got distant mountains, got trees, got Brian here living on the left third perfectly, and the sand in the foreground. It's pretty cool. Again, here, this walk-up shot, it's just a difference in height of the camera. You don't really feel the mountains here that much. I guess you start to at the very end, versus the angle I chose. I was much lower, and you're feeling the top of mountains really the entire time. I'd rather see in the background opposing elements, mountains and sky, versus if there's just mountains back there, it's not as interesting as mountains and sky the whole time. So getting a lower angle helps show that off. So that's it. It's a fun time. Wrap up, use foreground, use midground, use background elements. You want those wider shots if you're really going for cinematic visuals. If you watch the other video, you want edge lighting, you want ND, so you can have your aperture real low, which makes the background more out of focus, more beautiful looking. And it's really all about, I feel like I'm still at the beginning of my journey as far as framing goes. It's really all about studying film and studying photographs, old school photographs, the high level people, seeing what they did and then just copying it. A lot of cinema is just copying it. If you want something to look cool, find something that looks cool and do what they did. Stay obsessed.